Hi, Peggy Palcasella here from Thursday Night Pizza. Today I will be teaching you the ultimate meal prep recipe, homemade frozen pizza. All right, so I already have my dough ready to go. I made one recipe of my weeknight dough, divided it in half. One ball I turned into a 12-inch round for a 12-inch pizza. The other ball I divided into 4 to make 4 individual pizzas so I could show you how that's different. It's really not that much different, but I want to show everybody that they can do this in any size freezer. All right, so once your dough is all rolled or stretched out and you've got it on where you're gonna bake it. So I'm gonna do my 12-inch on the baking steel in the oven, and I'm gonna do my individuals in a baking sheet. So get them where they have to go, and then prick them with a fork. The reason you prick the dough with a fork in the way that I just did is that you don't want it to puff up too much when it bakes in the oven. So you don't want those giant bubbles popping up in the middle of your pizza, because then how are you gonna get the toppings on after the crust is par baked? Mine are all ready to go. You're gonna put them in a really hot oven. I've preheated my oven at 550. You could do 500 too, and you're going to bake them either on a stone or steel or in the baking sheet for about 5 minutes, just until the dough looks dry and is dry to the touch, not tacky, and the bottom of the dough is just beginning to turn golden. I'm gonna pop mine in the oven, and then I'll see you in about 5 minutes or so. Yep, these look great. They have just begun to brown a little bit on top. They're not at all tacky to the touch. They move around on the baking sheet really easily, and you can see they're a little bit browned on the bottom. So these actually turned out perfect. This one is a little more brown than I like, but I think it's still gonna be great when we reheat it later. Now we're ready to top these par-baked crusts. You could let yours cool down for a little bit. I'm not too worried about it. Mine are still pretty hot. I have my dump and stir marinara sauce, super easy. I have fresh mozzarella, low moisture mozzarella, Parmesan cheese, salami, blanched broccoli, and sliced olives. The reason I have 2 different kinds of mozzarella today is that I'm doing a little experiment to see if the moisture content of fresh mozzarella is a little too wet for frozen pizza. We will see when I cook it in a couple of days. Let's get these things topped and get them ready for the freezer. In order to make sure that your pizzas last as well as possible in the freezer, you're going to have to double wrap them. Now I know not everyone is okay using plastic wrap, and that's totally fine. You can use 2 layers of foil. I am going to use 1 layer of plastic wrap followed by a layer of foil, because I find that that's the way they last the best and avoid freezer burn. And there you go. These are ready to go in the freezer. If you have a small freezer and you can't lay them flat, don't worry about it too much. I mean, it is great to get them as flat as possible because then they will bake a little easier. They won't go into your oven a little wonky. But do what you need to do with what you have. This is a low stress recipe. I'm gonna go ahead and put mine in the freezer and then freeze them for up to 3 months. Welcome to the future. It is 3 days after I prepared my frozen pizza. They are still hanging out in the freezer. My oven is preheated to 500 degrees Fahrenheit with my steel in there. I've also got a perforated pizza pan and my trusty rimmed baking sheet to show you all the different ways you can bake your frozen pizzas from frozen without thawing, no matter what you have in your kitchen. All right, now I'm gonna get these guys in the oven and we're gonna bake them until the cheese is completely melted and browning in spots, and the crust around the edges is nice and golden brown. Now that all the pizzas are out of the oven, we can see how successful our frozen pizza experiment was. These 2 minis baked on my preheated steel for about 8 or 9 minutes, I think it took, and the bottom is a little overcharred, but still delicious, and it's still gonna be a nice crispy crust. I can hear how crispy it is. The cheese on top just began to brown, which is exactly what you want, and the crust around the edges is nice and golden. So the steel, great for frozen pizza. The two minis here baked on the perforated pizza pan, as you can see, and the bottoms are nice, perfectly golden brown. They're a little uneven in the center because the pizzas weren't perfectly flat in the freezer. If you can get yours perfectly flat, they will bake a little better and more evenly, but I'm not gonna complain about this. I can still hear how crispy this is when I press on it. The cheese on top is just browned in little spots, which is perfect. It's golden around the edges. Great. All the minis were baked with low moisture mozzarella, which I suspected would probably be a little better for frozen pizza, just because it melts so much better and has less water content. So there's less of a risk of the pizza getting soggy, since it has to thaw first and then bake in the oven, unlike when you just bake it from fresh. So let's see how the fresh mozzarella turned out on this pizza, which was baked on the rimmed baking sheet. Now, first of all, this one took a little longer. This one took about 15, 16 minutes, which still is not a big deal. The crust is perfect around the edges, and the cheese is browned in spots, although I can see the fresh mozzarella didn't perfectly melt. So I also noticed that it's a little wet on top. It's got water moving around there, which I might blot out, but we'll see how it tastes. Now the bottom, this one I par-baked a little more, so this is a nice crisp. Oh, there's liquid oozing off of it from the fresh mozzarella. Okay, let me cut these guys up and see how they look when they're cut, and then we can eat. These two baked on the steel, the preheated steel in the oven. These two baked on the perforated pizza pan, and this bigger one baked on my regular baking sheet, my rimmed baking sheet. So all right, this one with the fresh mozzarella, let's see, it's a little watery. I can see liquid dripping off of it a little bit, but I'm gonna give it a taste and see if that would really bother me that much. Let's see. Fresh mozzarella, not my first choice for frozen pizza, but I will say the tops of the cubes of fresh mozzarella have browned really nicely, and they create these little nuggets of almost melted cheese, which gives the pizza a really cool texture. Now, the liquid I don't love, but it isn't making the pizza soggy because the dough was par-baked before you froze it. All over, I think the baking sheet is a great way to bake pizza. Nice and crispy crust, delicious results. All right, let's move on. The perforated baking sheet, let's see. The dough looks perfectly cooked. The cheese on top is really nice and melted, and the bottom is golden. Let's see how crispy this crust is. Really wonderful. Same deal. The crust is nice and crispy. The top is perfectly warmed through, and the cheese is melted and browned in spots. Awesome. This one that baked on my preheated steel really doesn't look much different than the slices that came from the baking sheet pizzas, which makes me think if you don't have a stone or a steel at home, totally fine. Doesn't really make much of a difference. All right, let me taste this guy. Well, that's about it. The verdict is that frozen pizza is super awesome. It is the best meal prep recipe you can come up with. You par-bake some dough, stick some toppings on it, anything you like, wrap it up, put it in the freezer, and forget about it for up to 3 months. Then when you're super hungry, or you just need a really easy weeknight meal, you preheat your oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. You stick the pizzas in there for about anywhere from 8 to 15 minutes, and then dinner is done. Amazing. I hope you try it. Let me know in the comments, share it on social media, and happy pizza making.